I would like to talk a little bit about the rate case in some more detail tonight. Before I do so, let me introduce Citizens Action Coalition. We are a nonprofit organization here in Indiana. We're turning 50 years old this year, so we're excited to be celebrating that key milestone this year. It's been 50 years of advocating on behalf of Hoosiers. We're both environmental advocates as well as consumer advocates. So we really are threading the needle of both helping the environment as well as looking out for consumers here in Indiana. I'm going to focus most of my discussion tonight on the rate case. I would like to present some of the details of what is actually in that case, what is Duke proposing, so folks on this call are aware of some of those key proposals. It is relatively recent filing, so we're still continuing to dig into it. There's a lot in this case, but I wanted to share some of our preliminary results with all of you. So as some of the speakers on this call have already talked about, Duke is our largest electric utility in Indiana and our biggest laggard when it comes to getting off coal and switching to clean energy. In this rate case, Duke is asking for a monster rate hike. Right now, they're projected to have revenues of roughly $3 billion as of 2026. They would like to increase that by $500 million. So in this rate case, they're asking for a nearly 16 or over 16% overall increase in how much money they can collect from their customers every single year. So one of the big proposals in this case is an increase to their shareholders' profit margin. They would like to increase that from 9.7% to 10.5%. With it, that's tens of millions of dollars in additional revenue every single year that would go to Duke's shareholders. This rate increase would be implemented over 2 steps. In other words, your rates would go up once in March 2025 when the commission issues its final order, and then the rates would go up again by another amount in January 2026. So 2-phase stepping in this nearly $500 million rate increase if they get what they want. What does this mean for families, Hoosier families? You might have seen some news articles or press releases touting a 19% rate increase for residential customers, or about $27 a month. That is Duke's fuzzy math. That is not actually how much your bills are going up. Your bills are actually going to be going up on average about $42 a month between rates in effect today and rates that are going to be in effect at the time of the final rate increase come January 2026 as a result of this rate case. The difference in that math is that Duke has not included in those bill estimates several different ways that bills are going to be going up outside of the rate case, regardless of what happens in the rate case. Things like spending on the grid, things like spending on coal ash that have already been approved or have already been proposed in separate cases or proceedings before the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. So it's important to keep in mind the overall bill impact that customers are going to face in the next 2 years is going to be dramatic. That's over $500 a year that Duke Energy residential customers, on average, are going to be paying to Duke every single year if Duke gets what it's asked for. This chart here on this slide shows you for residential customers what is happening to each of your bill components. You can see that the customer facilities charge, which is how much you have to pay every month, regardless of how much you use, is going up to $13.70 as proposed by Duke. And then Duke currently has and is proposing to continue what is called a declining block rate design. In other words, they've broken out your usage so that the first amount of usage you use, the first 300 kilowatts you use in a month, is a really high price for that electricity. It's about 15 cents per kilowatt hour today, and Duke's proposing to raise it to nearly 20 cents a kilowatt hour by 2026. Then as you use successively more electricity, in other words, additional blocks of electricity in a month, those rates are lower than that first set of electricity. So the next 700 kilowatt hours you use, currently about 11 cents a kilowatt hour. Duke wants to raise it to more than 14 cents a kilowatt hour. And then the final block, anything you use above 1,000 kilowatt hours a month, which is kind of a typical amount for a residential household. You can see that it's going from about 10 cents to 13 cents per kilowatt hour. In other words, all these charges are going up by nearly a third or so. So what are some of the proposals that are driving this rate increase? Well, it should be no surprise based on what we've heard from our speakers tonight that a big factor in Duke's rate increase is related to coal. I was floored when I saw Duke have this chart in their testimony because it shows you just how preposterous their rate case really is. It's based on an assumption that their coal plants, which have been using less and less coal each year because they're running less and less often, and Duke is retiring more and more coal units, slowly, but they are. So you can see those green bars on this chart. That's what's actually happened so far. You can see this is showing you how much coal, how many tons of coal Duke burns at their coal plants every year. So it's been steadily declining. In this rate case, Duke is saying, that was just a fluke. We're actually going to be dramatically increasing the amount of coal we're going to burn this year and next year. So a very dramatic increase in how much coal they're burning. They would like to maintain what's called a 45 days of coal inventory, which is just saying that they want to be able to have 45 days supply on hand at each of their coal plants, based on the maximum amount of coal that that coal plant can burn. Now, you might say, well, maybe it makes sense for reliability or for some reason to have some coal on hand. You don't want to just be relying on, the trains dropping off new coal every day for the plant. And okay, the problem with this, though, is, obviously it's coal, and so it's very dirty. But the problem with this concept of fuel inventory is that Duke gets to earn a profit on how much fuel inventory the commission lets them have. So fuel costs in general are just typically a pass-through cost. If usually utility doesn't get any markup or earn a profit on the fuel that they burn. But this concept of fuel inventory is different. They actually do get to earn a profit on that amount. And then another part of this coal proposal is delaying the retirement of several of the coal plant units. So Gibson, we heard a lot about earlier, it's one of the biggest CO2 polluters in the country. Duke is delaying the retirement of Unit 5, which was supposed to retire in 2026, all the way to past 2030. Cayuga Unit 2, another coal-fired power plant unit, was supposed to retire in 2028. Duke is pushing that back out to 2029. So bottom line is every single Gibson coal-fired power plant unit is now, according to Duke, not going to retire until after 2030. When you burn a lot of coal, you have a lot of pollution. You have a lot of coal ash as a result. And this case is a good example of how when you don't consider those environmental impacts, they come back to bite you in the end. Duke has massive amounts of coal ash that it has improperly disposed of and stored at its sites, at its coal plants. It's just dumped it onto the ground with no liner. It's kept it in coal ash ponds, so soaked in water with that coal ash water full of toxins leaching down into our groundwater, sitting right next to our major rivers like the Wabash River, the Ohio River. In this case, we see massive amounts of these cleanup costs now that Duke has to actually clean up this coal ash that's been improperly disposed, that they want to pass on to ratepayers. So one of the big proposals is a $223.5 million proposal for another set of coal ash cleanups. Notably, in that proposal is $92 million for coal ash cleanup costs that have previously been disallowed or barred by the Indiana Court of Appeals. Duke had previously tried to collect that $92 million. The Court of Appeals struck that down under the way that the utility proposed that. So it's coming back in a rate case and proposing a different way to collect that money. It should be noted that Duke already has a different pending case for a different set of coal ash cleanup costs. That is another $327 million. So that's pending before the commission right now. That would be additive, mostly additive to these other costs. And then there's millions of dollars more in coal ash closure costs that were approved previously in the past in Duke's last rate case. So there's all sorts of costs that Duke has spent decades incurring and that the ratepayers in the past benefited from, if you will, by not having to pay that price, that are now being shoved onto consumers in the present. Another proposal in this rate case is that Duke wants to study carbon capture and sequestration at its Edwardsport coal gasification power plant. You'll recall this is that big boondoggle project that went billions of dollars over budget. That was a total fiasco that led to, well, it was a major scandal. I'll leave it at that for now. We'll say we'll focus on the study Duke is proposing to do. They got a grant from the U.S. Department of Energy that would cover half the cost of the grant. But the other half of the cost, a little bit more than half, would be Duke wants permission to track those costs so that it can recover those costs in the future from ratepayers. So note that the cost you saw earlier in the slide on your bill impacts, that does not yet include this type of cost, but Duke is asking for permission to collect this in the future from ratepayers. We think this is a particularly ridiculous proposal for a number of reasons, but for one, this plant is already super expensive to operate. It doesn't make sense to continue to gasify coal just on an economics basis, and certainly doesn't when you slap on a massive investment in carbon capture technology, when you use all the energy that goes into operating that carbon capture technology, and when you consider the major risks of injection. So they're going to be studying injecting it into a different formation than they previously studied for the site. And they're also proposing to look at capturing the carbon dioxide post-combustion, whereas previously they looking at a method of taking out the CO2 before they burn the coal or the gas from that power plant. So we have a lot of concerns about this proposal, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense for ratepayers to be footing the bill for sure. So key points on getting involved in this rate case. As we heard earlier, there's going to be public hearings. That is really critical. Really critical to participate in. These rate cases don't happen often. The last rate case was 5 years ago. So the commissioners have got 5 years since hearing from Duke Energy ratepayers about their bills and about all these other issues that come up in a rate case. So this is your chance to speak face-to-face to those commissioners, to those decision makers, be in the same room with them and give them your thoughts on whether Duke should be charging customers a massive rate increase to pay for things like coal-fired power plants and CCS projects. You can also submit written comments. It's really vital to make sure your voice is heard one way or another. And as we saw earlier, we're expecting those dates to be finalized in the near future, but expect an early July deadline for those comments. Expect the hearings to happen in roughly the June timeframe. And please do spread the word. And as you research this case, please do check in on the Citizens Action Coalition website. We pride ourselves in having some really great resources on our web pages that really go into a lot of details about some of these critical issues. And please reach out if you have questions. I will just really quickly hit on the two other topics. I know we're a little bit past time, so I want to make sure we have time for questions and other things. I'll just very quickly hit on the key points. As we heard, the integrated resource plan is really critical. It's feeding into issues like this rate case because those resources Duke has. It then has a rate case and asks for cost recovery and fuel costs, things like that. So we need a clear roadmap from Duke in this integrated resource planning process about retiring its coal plants promptly and about replacing those coal plants with clean resources. We have a tremendous set of resource options available, everything from wind and solar to energy efficiency and distributed generation, battery demand response, all these great resources that Duke has not invested very much into so far. And we would like them to avoid building out a bunch of new polluting fossil gas power plants, as well as pursuing risky and unproven technologies that they have expressed interest in pursuing elsewhere. So make sure you attend the public hearings, or excuse me, the public stakeholder meetings. The next one is 2 weeks from today. So mark your calendars and register at Duke's website. The last thing I'll leave you with is a teaser about a future filing. Duke is expected to come in, propose a new large combined cycle peaker plant, 2 units for that. These are pretty catastrophic. It's replacing a large baseload coal plant with a large baseload fossil gas plant. So it's not really climate progress, if you will. It's not even replacing coal with maybe a peaker plant that operates very infrequently, and maybe you could say that is providing a substantial reduction in emissions. Unfortunately, this is a combined cycle plant which does operate around the clock. They do have much higher capacity factors. And so we have a lot of concerns that this is leading us in the wrong direction, particularly from a utility like Duke that has been such a laggard when it comes to renewable energy. So it's not like they have too much renewable energy and they need another resource to balance it out. They don't have just about any renewable energy today. It's a utility that's 90+% fossil fuels today. And they're proposing a major expansion of that fossil fuels when we should be obviously moving toward clean renewable energy, maximizing our energy efficiency, and looking for flexible, clean resources to balance our grid.